custodians of the land we meet on this afternoon, the Wiradjuri and Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Housekeeping for emergencies to leave the chamber. The councillors Horton and myself in the chamber with staff know the procedure out the door and to the right and to the footpath, and await further instructions. The next item is in relation to live streaming, and that's exactly what it means. Anyone who speaks or makes comments during the council meeting, your comments and remarks are live streamed, so there needs to be some caretaking in regard to the comments that are made. And I'll read that attendees are advised that they may be subject to legal action if their actions result in inappropriate and or unacceptable behaviour and or comments. And we will keep that in mind. The next item on the agenda, councillors, is public forum. And I have in front of me 4 speakers in public forum today. And the first speaker of the day is Paul Parker, speaking for the motion of Resolution 21/183, item F1 and F2. Are you there, Paul?
I am.
Paul, you have 5 minutes to present to council, and I'll give you a little warning. Hello at the 4-minute mark if you get there. So
yep.
The floor is yours, Paul.
Okay, I welcome this opportunity to speak in favour of the rescission motion. As most councillors would be aware, for 37 years I was the district agronomist for Young, covering the former shires of Burua, Harden and Young, and that now comprises the whole of Hilltops Council. For over 25 years I've been a community member of the Environmental Initiatives Committee, firstly as a member of the Young Council's EIC, as were councillors Walker and Ingram, and I am now a member of the Hilltops EIC. As a district agronomist and on behalf of the Department of Primary Industries, I had significant input into the previous 2 Young councils and the last Harden Council's LEP plans, which are now being replaced by the current proposed LEP. In addition, I've spent a significant amount of time having input into this proposed LEP for Hilltops Council. Clause 7.2 and 7.4 is the same as were in each of the past 3 individual council LEPs, and the residents across the previous councils accepted these clauses being included, and it amazes me that someone suddenly finds a problem. It is even more disconcerting that after all the time, money and effort spent by council staff, consultants and EIC committee members as representatives of the whole community in developing the LEP, a last-minute changes made when objectors had adequate time to submit comments on the draft plan when it was on public display, but did not do so. Fail to remove these proposed changes could result in delays to the implementation. I wish to point out that across the community and councillor members of the Hilltops EIC, many thousands of hectares of farming land are covered, and yet not one of the EIC members found any cause of concern, especially the type of concern now being expressed. Surely if there are any problems or possible constraints impacting on farming operation, the members of the EIC as farmers would have identified them and suggested changes. Looking at the specific clauses under 7.2, there's a number of government requirements there which you're all aware of and probably read. This clause does not impact on, as it stood, or to be amended again, this does not impact on current farming operations, but ensures any future proposed developments are undertaken in an appropriate and sustainable way. It is important to remember that in previous studies undertaken by the then Department of Land and Water Conservation and private consultants, that only 4% of the old Harden and Young shires had original tree cover left on them. Also, there are only limited areas of the endangered grassy box woodland present across the area now. Clause 7.2 tries to ensure that the remaining tree cover and endangered woodlands are retained. It does not stop anyone from removing an exotic tree species near a house. Important to remember that biodiversity is not just the trees, but the whole ecological system, which is so critical to addressing climate challenges. 7.4 Groundwater vulnerability. The purpose of this clause is to maintain and protect the quality of groundwater and the hydrological functions of all our farmland. It does not stop farmers from applying for a permit to drill a bore, which is a state government requirement, along with the bore subsequently being licensed. Important to remember that the whole of the Harden Shire is a significant component of the Goldfields water catchment area, supplying water to towns like Young, Harden, Cootamundra, Temora and West Wyalong.
You've got about a minute, Paul.
Thank you. With regard to the change to RU1 and RU4, allowing horticulture use without consent, this places adjoining landholders in a potentially difficult and litigious situation. This could occur should an orchard or vineyard be planted right up to a property boundary and with subsequent impacts on farm management practice, such as the proper use of pesticides. Finally, I wish to thank Councillor Flannery for bringing this issue to the notice of the wider Hilltops community, and I'm sure they will now follow with much more interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. The second speaker today, councillors, is Richard Page for the motion resolution 21183, item F1 and F2. Are you there, Richard?
Yes, I am.
Richard, you have 5 minutes to speak to council, and I'll just give you a little warning bell at 4 minutes if you reach that mark. The floor's yours.
Very
Richard.
good. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. My name is Richard Page. I'm a farmer from near Monteagle on Wiradjuri country. I'm also currently the Deputy Chair of the Young District Land Care, and I'm a member of the Hilltop Solution Committee. I'm speaking in support of the motion you have before you today. The purpose of the local environment plan is to provide consistent planning controls and progress the strategic objectives of the Hilltops Council in relation to the protection of the environment. To have an LEP with no reference to biodiversity or groundwater vulnerability seems to be at odds with the purpose of the LEP. Removing these clauses designed to protect our groundwater from contamination and of biodiversity from being decimated would remove the possibility for staff to reference these issues with any new development and remove a local reference for developers when they are planning. While I acknowledge there are state and federal planning regulations that cover these areas, I believe it is important for the clauses to be in our LEP to provide the knowledge that we need for a local context. I also note that if the two clauses were to be removed, we would have the only LEP in regional and rural New South Wales without these environmental protections. The Hilltops has a growing reputation as a supplier of great food and wine, and it has a growing tourism potential that we hopefully can build on. Our clean green image is and will be a great part of this success. And to continue to be clean and green, we need to protect our environment. Biodiversity is the keystone of any healthy environment, from trees, plants, birds, animals, insects. They all play their part and need to be protected and have the conditions and space to flourish. This is the purpose of having the clause protecting biodiversity in our LEP. The need to have some oversight on development is important. Development at any and all cost will not be the way forward. The same can be said for protecting our groundwater supplies from contamination and overuse, and I'm sure anyone who uses groundwater in our district would agree. Any farmer who uses bores or landholder would have seen the levels and flows of these bores drop during the latest drought and probably increase again after the last 18 months of rain. This goes to show how they are recharged and that contaminations can easily flow into these underground water sources, and once there will populate and pollute these waters for lifetimes. Groundwater also doesn't start and stop at a council boundary. And I'd be interested to know what our neighbouring council areas would make of us having open slather on groundwater use and contamination when it could and would directly affect them all, not only for agriculture and development, but also drinking water supplies. It seems the motion to remove these clauses was a last-minute idea because of some issues with the mapping. This is not the reason to completely strip the LEP of environmental protection. Maybe the mapping needs some work, and I understand the council is working with DPIE to get this sorted. Using ground truthing in the interim is a much better solution than kicking the problem down the road for another 5 years. Also note the LEP has been before council for some time, and I'm sure many hours of work from staff and councillors gone into it, not to mention the money spent as well as public consultation periods. So to think that such a major change could be voted upon at the last minute with little or no discussion seems to be confusing at best. I'd also like to comment on the process of that motion. The motion to remove these environmental protections seemed to be a late opportunity to change the whole meaning of the document. If these are such large issues that need discussion, surely any time over the last 2 years would have been the time to bring them forward for proper discussion and consultation with staff and the relevant authorities, not rushed through like an afterthought. This doesn't show the good governance or leadership or transparency that the Hilltops would expect. Now more than ever, it's time for councils to show environmental responsibility. This doesn't mean putting blocks in front of development, but rather it means making sure the environment is considered to be important when looking at development. With the coming challenges we will face from changing climate, the protection of our environment at all levels has never been more important. As I said, biodiversity is the keystone of this healthy environment. Finally, I'd like to thank the councillors who put this rescission motion before you and encourage you all to follow the recommendation and vote to put the environment back in the local environment plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. The next speaker, councillors, tonight is Sophia Fernon, and Sophie's speaking against the motion of resolution 21-183, items F2 and F3. Are you there? Yes, there she is. So
yes, hi.
Same scenario. You have 5 minutes, and I'll give you a little warning shout if you get to the 4-minute mark. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I was disappointed to read in the council papers that a rescission motion had been moved by councillors Rolls, Manchester and O'Connor regarding the intended use of RU1 and RU4 zoned lands for horticulture. This rescission motion does include other issues, but I wonder why the intended agricultural use of RU1 and RU4 would be coupled with other unrelated issues. Young and the Hilltops area was built on the backbone of all sorts of farming, including a strong horticultural background since it was settled in the 1860s. Although at present, horticulture and viticulture is not reaping the returns of the same returns as broadacre farming, it would be short-sighted to think this won't turn around in the future. To put a restriction on land that has been designated specifically for agriculture seems short-sighted, particularly after it was noted by staff that the issues relating to orchards had been originally overlooked. The same councillors who designated RU1 and RU4 lands for agricultural use are now stating that it is not suitable for agricultural use because it might disrupt the neighbours. I find this hypocritical and the opposite to what the Director of Planning stated regarding how the state government would feel about the zoned use, particularly small lot RU4. To think that horticulture could not go on RU4 land, bearing in mind that RU4 is rural agricultural land that can be zoned down to 2 hectares, is quite bizarre. What other kind of sustainable or agricultural use could you have on RU4? Piggeries and intensive chook laying facilities are not permissible due to smell, so what does that leave other than horticulture and vegetable crops? Clauses 7.2 and 7.4 around terrestrial biodiversity and groundwater vulnerability are different from RU1, RU4 zoning and need to be dealt with separately. 7.2 and 7.4 should be removed as councillors Rolls, Manchester and O'Connor are proposing. However, permission relating to orchards should go as per staff recommendation. I would strongly advise the councillors in this room not to move the rescission motion regarding RU4 zoned lands. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The fourth speaker today, councillors, is Adika, and he's speaking against the motion, resolution 21/183, item F3. Adita, the floor's yours. You've got 5 minutes, and I'll give you a little shout out at the 4-minute mark. The floor's yours.
Thank you, sir, and good afternoon. Mr. Mayor, councillors, senior staff, the resolution adopted by council in the ordinary meeting of 25th August 2021 divided our factory, workshop, administration building, laboratory and warehouse into 2 separate zones, one industrial and the other recreational. This dual rezoning reduces the industrial zone land to less than a third of the total land owned by us. Our bank's valuer had valued all our land based on industrial use because our industrial infrastructure at present is spread over 4 of the 5 lots that we own at 2 Park Avenue. There seems to be no reason as to why the entire land owned by us cannot be zoned as industrial, especially when council has already approved the industrial zoning of 3 of these 5 lots owned by us. Council has also charged us business use rates for all our land. Council is today considering a proposal to zone lots 1, 2, 705 and 2470 as light industrial IN2 and lot 2494 as private recreation RE2. We have not yet received clarification on whether our current activities could be classified under an IN2 zoning. Our company operates within the strict conditions of its license, and the same is monitored and enforced by the New South Wales Environment Protection Agency. Hence, there is no reason to change the zoning to a light industrial zone. We respectfully request lots 1, 2, 705 and 2470 to be zoned general industrial IN1, being a zoning which more correctly describes the use which is currently being carried on by our company and which has previously been carried on by our company for over 69 years. Further, lot 2494 should, in our respectful submission, be rezoned as light industrial IN2. That will enable our company to utilize that land for permitted industrial uses, subject to future development approval by council, as well as preserve its commercial value to enable it to pay for a portion of the relocation cost of our plant in future. On the other hand, if lot 2494 is zoned private recreation RE2 as proposed, it will lose its value. The effect of that will be substantial, as this particular lot is approximately 1.31, that is 1.31 acres in size, which is just over 1/4, just over 25% of our total land holding of 5.1 acres. There is no financial return to council or any...
You've got about a minute, Adita. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Or any discernible public benefit from such a step. In 2013, council had resolved to zone all our 5 lots as residential. We once again offer to zone our land as residential once our plant can be relocated. A loss in value of our land will trigger a review by our bank that could jeopardize our ongoing facilities as well as our pending loan application for equipment that is a must for our survival. In summary, we respectfully request council to approve the zoning of lots 1, 2, 705 and 2470 as IN1 and lot 2494 as IN2. That will, in our submission, ensure that one of the largest employers in Young is not put at risk, thereby preserving the jobs of our employees and many other people indirectly dependent on our regional business. Thank you for your time.
Okay, councillors and speakers. Any of those speakers, all of the speakers, we would ask you now that you actually leave the Zoom meeting and catch up and watch the rest of the council meeting, if you like, via council live stream. Thank you. Okay. Next item, councillors, is attendance and apologies, and I believe we've got a full contingent of councillors. There's no apologies for tonight's meeting. Next item is 5, any disclosures of interest, councillors? Take that as a no. The next item is a notice of motion put forward by Councillor Rolls, Councillor O'Connor and Councillor Manchester to rescind Resolution 21183, item F1, to rescind Resolution 21/183, item F2, and to alter Resolution 2183, item F3 only. And I'm not sure how that'll work when the company just spoke against that rescission motion. Anyway, this report and the recommendation has been put there by those 3 councillors. So before we start, do we have a mover and a seconder? Move Councillor O'Connor, seconded Councillor Armstrong. Thank you.
No. Question.
Yeah. Oh, so you're not the seconder?
No, I'm not the seconder. I want a question.
Well, I'll get a mover and a seconder first. I had a mover, Councillor O'Connor. I'm after a seconder. Councillor Manchester, thank you. Question, Councillor Armstrong, before I go any further.
This is a matter of process. Will we be dealing with this as one motion, or will we be dealing with it as 3 separate motions?
We will be dealing with this as 3 separate motions.
Thank you.
Thank you. On that note, I'll open the floor to either Councillor Rolls, O'Connor or Manchester to speak to the first recommendation, that is rescind Resolution 21183, item F1. Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to first acknowledge the immensity and quality of work that's gone into the LEP, compiled by the staff, ably led by then Director Rowland and Strategic Planner Bryce Whedon. I'd also like to thank the thoroughness and diligence of the LEP committee, led very competently by Councillor Greg Armstrong. I would sincerely like to apologise to the Hilltops community for not engaging in vigorous debate when this item in question was brought up at the end of our discussions on the LEP. Unfortunately, we were about to vote on the adoption of the LEP when the items were introduced, and I can only say I was just bamboozled by the speed and scale that I couldn't think critically about what I wanted to say at the time, just that I would not support them. I'd also like to thank the 40 or 50 people who've emailed, written and called to discuss the rescission motion. It's right that you call us to account. As the consent authority, we have an obligation to consider any adverse impact from proposed developments. We have a responsibility to deliver ecologically sustainable developments and must have an LEP that reflects those values. There have been 3 years of extensive work done by council staff and community consultation, as well as considerable sums of money spent. The community engagements have been thorough, measured and deliberated. Once the document had been put on public exhibition and submissions received and addressed, then the community had the right to feel that they could trust council to act on their wishes and not make substantial changes without their consultation. Our community needs to be able to trust us, their elected members, to act with honesty, integrity and transparency in the best interests of the whole community. The motion and changes to the LEP were passed subsequent to the extensive community consultation and input, and without the opportunity for the community to have input into those changes. Given that the accepted changes could result in potentially very significant effects on the natural environment and other members in the community, allowing these changes without room for community consultation is a worrying corruption of proper due process. I believe if these amendments are passed, council will lose its credibility and will be regarded as open to being manipulated and corrupted by those with the power to do so. I feel personally that we will have betrayed our community. Now, upon reflection, there are a series of questions I would like to ask the Director to better understand the reasons behind the original amendments to remove those clauses on terrestrial biodiversity and groundwater mapping. So is that okay through you, Mr. Mayor? Can I ask the Director some questions?
You may, Councillor.
Thank you. During the 3 years of LEP planning, meetings, community engagement and subsequent submissions, did anyone other than Mrs Beveridge last week raise issues about the clauses or maps on terrestrial biodiversity and groundwater?
I'll hand to the director, and the Bryce is there, and we held
Thank you.
LEP committee held numerous meetings, and which I attended. I think I missed one in the last 2 years of those committee meetings, LEP, and it was definitely spoke about several times by Councillor Flannery in regard to those issues. I'll hand over to the Director of Planning.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor. In total, Council received 10 submissions in relating to biodiversity and groundwater. 5 submissions were with local knowledge to amend the location of overlay of biodiversity maps. We addressed these. They are part of the submission of the documentation. 3 submissions supported the inclusion of groundwater vulnerability and drinking water catchment maps. 1 submission supported the inclusion and expansion of the biodiversity terrestrial maps. 3 submissions raised or questioned the lack of clarity and ability to understand the rationale or methodology for development of terrestrial biodiversity mapping and groundwater vulnerability mapping. Again, they were consulted and engaged with. No submissions requested for the maps to be removed, and no submissions, basically we received no submissions to remove the maps during the community consultation period.
Thank you very much. So finally, the 3 questions I'd like to ask are, in whose interests are the amendments that were proposed? What are the consequences of these proposed amendments for ratepayers and the environment? And what conflicts may emerge as a result of the proposed amendments with farming and residential needs? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Councillor O'Connor. So I'm taking that as speaking for the recommendation. Someone would like to speak against the recommendation? Councillor Flannery.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First and foremost, I'd like to start by stating that I'm a strong supporter of the Hilltops draft LEP, and I believe we have a duty of care to protect the environment and everything that is about us in this time, especially in the face of significant climate change. I'd like to thank the staff for all they have done, the extensive work they did, in particular Greg Armstrong for his chairmanship throughout the time. It is imperative to make sure that we do our utmost to ensure that any planning policies we adopt are based on fact, and that is the basis upon which I move the amendments. To state that there were no submissions that raised concerns with these maps is factually incorrect. As the Director has pointed out, there were a number. It was pointed out by the Director just then that there were no submissions made to remove it. I guess the expectation was that the maps would be amended or adjusted to a point where they were based on fact, but sadly that has not happened. They still contain numerous errors, and as admitted by the Director at the last normal council meeting, they would be subject to a site visit when there is a dispute based on any of the, for example, biodiversity maps. I personally pointed out to the Chair, to the then Acting Director, Mr David Rowlands, to the Mayor, to the General Manager, and then made submissions about the errors in the maps. I have again looked at the maps today, and I can find areas throughout the Hilltops where the maps simply do not reflect what is being purported. Thank you to Paul Parker and Richard Page for their submissions. But on Richard Page's own admission, there may be some errors with the maps. The maps are the clauses. We were voting to adopt factually incorrect aspects into our LEP. We were voting to include maps that were generated by computer algorithms. And I'm sorry, I won't support it. The vitriolic and hysterical attacks that have come to me through numerous emails these days simply highlight the lack of information that people have about the LEP and the processes. Numerous have made, there have also been a number of LEP submissions and emails about conflict of interest, about personal interest, about allegations of IPART being involved. Well, I'd like to alert Council to the fact that under clause 4.2(4) of the Code of Conduct, a councillor will not be prevented from being present or voting on a decision at a council meeting in relation to a matter that they may have a pecuniary interest in if that matter is a proposal to amend a local environmental planning instrument. On that basis, I am entitled to take my position at the table to represent the position of the general wider community and to the concerns I have. Now, any amendments that may be made to the Hilltops draft LEP are for the Hilltops LEP. They do not relate to the previous Burra LEP, the Young LEP or the Harden LEP. Any submissions for any DA submissions that have been lodged to council under any of the existing LEPs, and I need to be clear about this, will not in any way and cannot in any way be impacted by the new LEP. It is a new LEP for the new council which will take place once it is gazetted by the government. Claims that have been made by many people who are holding themselves to be of very high personal esteem, I guess, astound me in the vitriolism that they seem to think that they can dish out. The reasoning for my motion is that the maps are not accurate and they are not founded on truth. I believe anyone who votes for this rescission motion or who would have voted for their inclusion would have been voting for council to present information that was not factually incorrect. I asked the director at the last council meeting, what happens with tree avenues that have been planted by landholders and then they go to lodge a DA, let's say for sheep yards, shearing shed, whatever it is, and they come out and there's tree avenues there which is containing fauna, flora. And the director's response was, well, they may have to buy biodiversity offsets. I'm sorry, I don't agree in having an LEP where land...
Councillor, I just might have to call a point of order there. The director just indicated to me that she didn't say that. So...
Okay, I'll reserve my opinion on that. But nonetheless, Mr Mayor, there are clearly maps with exotic vegetation included in them because they have been generated by computer algorithms. They have not been ground truth. There are maps which show groundwater vulnerability.
Councillor Flannery, I'll just not jump in again. I'm having staff tell me that they have been ground proofed. So I have to take that from the councillor.
So Mr Mayor, can I ask the director, so maps that I indicated that were planted, that I can have indicated have been planted, have now been removed for the biodiversity maps? Because when I looked at them prior to the last meeting, when I looked at them again today, they were still there. So on what basis have they been ground truth?
Pass to Bryce, who's going to take that question.
So through you, Mr Mayor, so submissions that were received from members of the public and the community relating to individual properties, they were relayed to the mapping team at the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment with annotated maps, and those maps were investigated and were amended accordingly based on that information. So those submissions that were received were passed on and the maps were amended. I'll also note that as a part of the exhibition period, the refinement of those maps was undertaken based on those comments received, as well as a manual review to remove any obvious errors that were found in the map that were based on the best available information. And this was done by removing and reshaping and adding various polygons and layers based on high resolution imagery that the department had access to. So council received those submissions, they were relayed, and the map was amended accordingly.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Mayor, I dispute maps on my place have been amended, but the director has confirmed that only where submissions were made have maps been amended. Is that correct? If people are not aware of the maps or haven't been involved in the submission, and they may have areas that are incorrectly included, other than adjusting the algorithm, they wouldn't have been amended. Is that correct?
Pass to Bryce again.
So the amendment process was using different criteria. So looking at different scales of imagery and refining based on size of biodiversity corridors and maps. There was call out to receive specific submissions from the community, but there was an initial lower tier level to review and amend the maps to make it as accurate as possible with the available information.
Thank you for that. Councillor Flannery, I might ask you to commence to wind up to your speaking against the motion. Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I would like the director or Bryce to answer the specific question. If a submission was not received, was any amendments made to landholders' maps? I would like the specific question answered, please.
Councillor Flannery, I've been made aware that council staff declined to answer that question at this time. So thank you.
I'll take that as a no. Thank you.
Councillors, what I'll do now is...
Mr. Mayor, I would like to sum up by saying that I do not accept and cannot vote for computer algorithms determining the basis upon which land owned for farming purposes can be assessed for a DA. I have no knowledge upon what science the groundwater vulnerability has been developed. It was not explained to us during any meetings. I attended virtually all the meetings. As you are well aware, we employed consultants for transport, freight, logistics, hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on consultants. And at no stage did we spend any money on consultants to review any of these aspects. As alluded to by the director, they've been reviewed by computers.
Thank you, Councillor Flannery. We might bring that to an end there. Councillor O'Connor had a fair hearing in the first speaker, and you've had a pretty fair hearing for the second speaker. So I'd ask for the speaker against, and I've got Councillor Rolls' hand in the air. Councillor Rolls.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm a bit confused here. Clause 7.2, that isn't just the map that we're talking about. Surely it's bigger than that. Could the staff explain exactly what it refers to?
Who'd like to take that? Bryce, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So clause 7.2 specifically relates to terrestrial biodiversity. There's 4 components to the clause. The first is the objectives of the clause, which are to maintain terrestrial and aquatic biodiversity, including protecting native fauna and flora, protecting ecological processes necessary for their continued existence, and encouraging the recovery of native fauna and flora and their habitats. The second aspect of the clause relates to the map itself, and it's saying that this clause applies to land identified as biodiversity on the terrestrial biodiversity map. The third clause relates to a development application and states, before determining a development application, the land to which this clause apply, the consent authority must consider whether the development is likely to have an adverse impact on habitat, condition, ecological value and significance of any threatened species, populations or ecological community, potential to fragment, disturb or diminish the biodiversity structure, function and composition of the land, any adverse impact on the importance of vegetation on the land and the habitat and survival of native fauna, a regionally significant species of fauna, flora or habitat elements providing connectivity to the land, and appropriate measures to avoid, minimise or mitigate the impacts of the development. As can be seen in the amended post-exhibition version, those words were provided in the submission from the Biodiversity Conservation Division of the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. They're directly based from the Biodiversity Conservation Act 2016. Part 4 is just relating to how development is to respond to that this particular clause. It says development consent must not be granted to development on land to which this clause applies unless the consent authority is satisfied that the development is designed, sited and will be managed to avoid any adverse environmental impact, or if that impact cannot be avoided, the development is designed, sited and will be managed to minimise that impact. Or if that impact cannot be minimised, the development will be managed to mitigate that impact. So this clause doesn't prohibit development. It's just a consideration to manage the site-specific application in response to Part 3 in terms of those various biodiversity aspects, and only applies to those lands that are identified on the map, which is in Part 2 of that particular clause.
Thank you for that. Bryce, I'll go back to, I was up to a speaker for the motion, unless someone had questions. Councillor Manchester.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Listen, I'll be brief. I think there's been a lot of discussion on this by Councillor Flannery and by Councillor O'Connor, plus by the speakers earlier on today. And there's been a lot of issues raised through the email process over the last 4 or 5 days. So I think everyone's probably more aware now of where we sit with all this. Now, I supported this rescission motions on the ground that I thought a couple of days after this, or a day after our meeting with this motion came forward, that it was rushed too much, and I don't think a lot of people fully understood it. And I'll have to agree that I didn't realise it until I started to dig further into it, that the ramifications this could possibly have. And just quickly, one of the main things that I thought of, and then I spoke to the director for confirmation of it, was that if we do not have these maps and the diversity and the groundwater mapping, and a DA does come forward, then that DA is then assessed under the state regulations, and that would concern me greatly. Like, if we have got errors in our mapping system, and they come apparent at the time of the DA, we've got a chance to look at those and hopefully correct it. But if we haven't got them in our system and it goes to the state for ramification, I'd hate to say what some of the conditions could be put on the DA that we have no say with. And that is my major point of concern. But I believe, and also it was mentioned by, I think, Mr. Page, that we would be the only local government area in the state without the mapping and diversity and groundwater proofing in our LEP document. The document will have errors, and I acknowledge that from Councillor Flannery. It's a major document, a very big document, a very complex document, and it will not be perfect. But hopefully we can get it perfect over the next few years. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for that, Councillor Manchester, and I'll take your points on board. So I'm back to, would anyone else like to speak against? Councillor Wallace.
Actually, just some, not actually speaking against, Mr. Mayor, just a few comments and a couple of questions to the Director. Thank you. I think, but last count, just before I started the meeting, I've received 47 emails about this matter in the last few days, and I think that is incredibly commendable. And I just hope that the level of engagement we've received on this issue might be continued in other issues, because I often feel after nearly 9 years of being involved in this organisation, in this role, and its precursor organisations, that we live in a bit of a bubble, and we put policies and documents and things on exhibition, and we hear nothing. So I commend all those people who have become involved in the issue, and I just hope they continue to be involved with the issue and encourage others to become involved with issues as well. Obviously, most of those emails came down on one side of the argument. I think those people need to realise that as councillors, we have been placed in a fairly invidious position, and I think Councillor Flannery described that quite well. We're being asked to pass a document that has known errors in it. I know some changes have been made. I know from a personal point of view that the mapping isn't correct in relation to my property, but I didn't make a submission about it. So, and I'm sure there are a lot of other people who fall into that category. I also had discussions with the Director in relation to the heritage report as part of the LEP. And I'm reliably informed that there are errors in that as well. But I was told that these can be remedied. So my question specifically in relation to item 1 of this rescission motion, or the questions are, and it was stated in the supporting documentation, was the first one is that we would be the only regional and rural council without these clauses. I suppose that's my first question. Is that correct?
To Director?
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. When we asked the department about any other state government legislation that did not have the clauses in their LEP, at the time the department advised us that we would be the only ones that wouldn't. However, we haven't actually fact-checked that against other local environment plans. I will say though, similar to the water, groundwater vulnerability, it's based on something of a catchment area. So where clauses will apply, it's because there's an environmental there. Obviously, there are additional environmental clauses in other local councils. If you're on the coast, you would have sea level rise. We're not going to have that environmental clause out here because it doesn't apply. So again, it would probably be if there is an omission in other local environment plans, it's probably because it doesn't exist. The environmental impact doesn't exist.
Thank you.
Thank you. My next question is also in the supporting documentation that ground truthing is currently the norm when rulings are questioned. Is that the case?
Who'd like to take that?
We would take that as part of the applications for development applications. We receive the assessment, the statement of environmental effects, which they will address the impact if it was identified. Staff will go out on site if it's deemed necessary to do that site inspection to assess against that criteria. If there's been an anomaly or an inaccuracy in any information, that's where that assessment criteria comes into, and that's where our assessment comes into play at a local level element. If it is part of an integrated development, it needs to be further assessed through additional reports and studies that will be offered to the other authorities and agencies which do the investigations and assessment criteria.
Thank you.
One more final question, Mr Mayor. It's a double barrel one though. I just wondered whether the Director through you was aware of other local government areas whether they had knowingly incorrect mapping, and following on from that is how comfortable are the planning staff in relation to having knowingly incorrect mapping?
Sorry, I might ask you to repeat the question again, but I'll try and answer. We do site-by-site investigations if they're based on the applications received. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question on that. You may need to repeat it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was wondering whether other local government areas whether you know whether other local government areas have knowingly incorrect mapping, and then knowing that our mapping is incorrect, how comfortable are planning staff with that?
Do you want to?
I'll pass that to Bryce.
Through you, Mr Mayor, unfortunately can't speak for other local government areas. In terms of the mapping, as was discussed, is that it's an indicative layer, and as the Director was saying, is that if a development application comes in, that site is done under assessment. Whereas if there is a tree avenue that is identified that isn't terrestrial biodiversity, isn't considered terrestrial biodiversity, that can be addressed in a statement of environmental effects and can be corroborated through that assessment process. So each site, if there is identified on the map, if there's a justification or an assessment saying that it isn't significant, or that that can be considered as a part of the assessment process for each site. I'll throw back to the director who added an additional comment.
Just in addition to what Bryce was talking about, the mapping that we have here in front of us is actually the highest level mapping from the data. There's additional 4 layers of this mapping. So we take the highest catchment of most likely impact. So where there could be other medium to low or insignificant impact, we don't consider that part of the mapping. We only take the highest level of that mapping for consideration in our maps.
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you for all that. I don't think it really answered my questions at all, but am I to take from it all that the staff would deem to be comfortable with the mapping as it is, knowing it's incorrect in part?
It is the most up-to-date data that it is available to us to provide to the community to have that visibility of what impacts assist on their property and for them to make an assessment of a development application without delay to their application, without cost to their application. So it's something that it is a visibility for them. It is something that they will need to address rather than not have it, and then potentially they would have to seek that data elsewhere, which could be another state authority or somewhere else, and again triggering other levels. And it may be a map that might identify medium to low mapping, so it could actually have a bigger impact on their development than if you look at a local level instrument map.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So we had a couple of speakers for, we've got a couple of hands raised. So we've got questions.
Question.
Councillor Rolls.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question just about if this clause is removed, and taking into account that if best practice mapping, I presume I'm reading. I'm not saying that the maps are incorrect. I'm saying that we're using the best data that is available, and of course that's going to change as the data that is available is going to change. But my question is really about legislative compliance. Are we compliant with the legislation if this clause is removed from our LEP?
I'll pass to the director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. At the time, we're making the plan under the legislation, and through that, to make that plan and go through a planning proposal, we had to prepare basically a draft LEP, and we advised the minister on what we will be consulting on. That was what we deemed gateway determination. So we put it out there to the community. We made and we consulted on that gateway. The department came back also as part of that gateway process. They asked us to make 2 minor amendments to our draft, which we then publicly exhibited. And then, so this is what we've pulled together today after that extensive consultation period, is what we propose to have adopted for the minister to, for them to actually, they're the planning authority, not council. So if we're non-compliant, that would have to be deemed by the minister once they receive the documentation.
So I'll take that as not a no and not as a yes. It would appear they're guidelines and we are compliant, is my take of that answer. I'll go to Councillor Flannery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, a couple of questions. The director answered that question when I asked the question before moving the amendment. I asked, was it compulsory to include these clauses in the LEP? And the answer was no. It was on that basis that I sought the removal of the clauses because of my concerns about the mapping. Mr. Mayor, could the director please advise, and it is certainly my understanding and it is the basis upon which I made the amendments, council staff, certified officers, any New South Wales government planning agencies, any LEP has, as we all know, the land use schedules. Under those schedules, it's deemed what can be done with consent, without consent, and then what is permissible, and then what is not permissible. There is almost nothing that can be done in RU5 land, RU4, most farming land without consent. Almost everything, other than actually farming a paddock, needs to be done with consent. So to put up farm bill, Previously you could put up farm buildings without consent. Now they need it with consent. As soon as you require consent, all the officers must consider fauna, flora, biodiversity, groundwater vulnerability, dust, dirt, noise impact. All those things must be considered. And no, this change will not impact on that. They are government legislation which overrides our LEP. We cannot dilute government legislation. We can strengthen it, but we cannot dilute it. We would be meeting our obligations under state government legislation under these amendments, and no council staff would be able to certify development without considering all those factors because they are part of state planning laws.
Thank you, Councillor.
That is a very important point.
Thank you, Councillor Flannery. There was more an understatement than a question, but I take it on board. Councillors, there's been a considerable debate and in relation to the matter. Does anyone else have a... Councillor, that's Councillor... I've got Councillor Horton, then I'll go to Councillor Armstrong, and then there's a couple more hands up. Yep. So we'll go around the table. Everyone can have a bit of a go at this. Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've had, like our Deputy Mayor, dozens and dozens, probably 50 or 60 phone calls and emails. And they're from very well-educated people. They've got more knowledge than I have regarding biodiversity and water concerns. Some of them specialise in that area. I'm elected by the people and I'm the representative of the people on the Hilltops Council. And as such, I've listened to them. I've done a lot more study, and I'm going to support the document, the motion, because that's what all these people want. And as I said, I'm here to represent them, and that's what I shall do. Now, the amendment one that we're talking about, I intend to support that for those reasons. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Horton. I think I sort of go to Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just initially, I guess some comments. First of all, I'd like to thank councillors for their glowing words in regards to the LEP Review Committee. It's a committee that's certainly worked very hard, very long, over 40 plus meetings, and I commend all the councillors that have bothered to take the time to come along to that meeting or attend the Zoom meetings for their contributions. It would be remiss of me to not highlight the fact that there has been considerable debate and discussion in regards to these two items during those meetings, to the point that the staff were able to get a representative of the mapping team and DPI to attend a workshop with council, which sadly was very poorly attended by councillors, but was nevertheless run. At that time, it was quite obvious that the mapping was incomplete and was, to a degree, inaccurate. There was a significant reliance upon an algorithm rather than ground truthing. However, the offer for ground truthing was given, and I guess that provided a modicum of confidence in moving forward with it. I guess the question I have is for staff, should this rescission motion fail, is there an opportunity for the state to require the LEP to include these maps in any event? That is, for council to be forced to put them back in again.
Great question, Councillor. I'll let Bryce want to answer that. Who wants to answer that question, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor. The Department of Planning and the Minister of Planning can require the mapping to be included and the clause to be included.
Thank you for that, Bryce. Answer your question, Councillor. Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walker had a comment. Councillor Walker?
Yeah, if I can highlight a few facts, I might point out first that my background is my background started in mapping, and we wouldn't put a map out unless we sort of guarantee some sort of accuracy with it, and that included with the Queensland Department of Mapping and Surveying. But I'm a little bit, perhaps a lot of this confusion comes out of the clarity not only of the mapping but of the roles. It's been just highlighted even in the discussions here, and I absolutely commend all the people who put submissions in. I got some 50, plus the speakers today, and I highly respect the opinions that are coming forward. But it also highlights to me the utter confusion and the clarity in whose role and responsibilities. Now we're saying that we don't want to put those a lot of these assessments over to the state. Well, I feel confident with state departments, and I've got noted here that I'm starting to worry who express concerns that where's the council suddenly going to get this training from on these highly technical and issues. I've got noted here that probably one of the biggest challenges that are facing us at the moment is, and indeed the world, but especially parts of Australia, is climate change. And we all know, and no one's disputing at any time, I don't think, the importance of the LEP. I need to express that, and I certainly don't express it, but I fully support Councillor Flannery in his comments in the way, as well as the speaker tonight, Savia, on her to do with RU1 and RU4. I expressed real concerns of the action and the type of reports that we're basing our whole future on. I liked one of the in one of those letters and submissions we received, and I hope he doesn't mind me quoting: resilience is a changing climate, and ultimately sustained farming production, I should say, depends on the protection and consideration of groundwater and biodiversity. My thoughts exactly. But the qualifications of people who are making those assessments and can plan us forward is, or the training or the qualifications, I should say, is so important. But it hasn't been defined here how we would assess that at a local level. As I say, there's no question at all the importance of the LEP, but it's just the assessment and the clarity of the mapping. As far as seeking permission for horticultural pursuits, being a horticulturalist and born in
Councillor Walker, Councillor Walker, I might just pull it up there in regard to that point. That'll be the next item we deal with. It's a separate item with the R1 to R4 and horticulture. So we'll deal with it. And, okay, thank you.
Thanks for that clarification.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor Rolls has got another question or comment before. Councillor Rolls.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'd just like to remind everybody that the proposed amendment was to remove the clause. It wasn't just about the mapping, it's about the whole clause, and that's where my concern is. I can understand concerns with the mapping, but to me, the other 3 points in the clause are more important, and that's the basis of it. It's not the mapping. I'd also, if you'll indulge me, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to just remind everybody about the ordinary meeting of 28th of February 2021. When Council endorsed the Hilltops Local Environment Plan Consultation and Engagement Strategy. And I'm just wondering whether the motion, as put forward by Councillor Flannery, actually complied with the consultation objectives. I would presume it didn't. If we look at some of the points, it says consulting effectively and broadly with the public and other stakeholders, engaging stakeholders in an educational consultative process. And I could go on and on through the whole points. So I would perceive that if we are going to, before we can do anything about this, it has to go back out to community consultation. Am I right in thinking this?
I'm not too sure who to throw to that. I can throw to Councillor Flannery, I suppose. Need a comment in regard
I
to that.
presume one of the directors would be able to talk about
I'm just waiting for a director to indicate to me whether they'd like to take the question or have an answer. Thank you, Councillor Rolls. Councillor Flannery, I'll just wait.
Mr. Mayor,
Councillor Flannery, just bear with me, please, for one moment. Do I understand anyone wants to speak to that, staff?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Council staff would strongly recommend that it would go back out to public consultation as a minimum. However, it is the decision of the councillors.
Thank you very much for that, Director. Councillor Flannery.
Mr. Mayor, I dispute there was extensive consultation on the mapping within the public. I absolutely dispute that. The maps are on the LEP, the council website, and I defy anyone to go and within 5 minutes access maps. They are very difficult to delve your way through.
Thank you for that, Councillor Flannery. So, given the conversation that's gone round, Councillor Rolls, is that your hand again?
Well, for
Councillor
you, Mr.
Stadmiller.
Mayor, I would presume that's mainly one of my points I was making. If we are going to do this amendment, it has to, before we can do anything, it has to go back out to public consultation. And surely after that meeting, we had three choices. We either approved it, we deferred it, which we did to look further, or it goes back out to public consultation. Major changes like this, we as a council can't do by ourselves without putting it out to public consultation again. That's how I would perceive it, and I presume that would be part of if you like, best practice and part of the probity of the whole of this issue.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Rolls. I would just remind.
Mr. Mayor, if we get it right.
Just councillors, please, councillors. I'll take the floor. Councillor Rolls, thank you for those words. The decision that we're dealing with at the moment is on a rescission motion 21/183 item F1. That's the matter we're dealing with currently. Any ramifications about that, I would suggest from a councillor, if you have a concern, and I would say to any councillors, they need to bring another notice of motion or something in regard to that, depending on results of tonight. So that's my comment on that. I was going to make another comment. Before I do, Councillor Stadmiller had his hand. So your turn, Councillor Stadmiller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't take very long. I just wanted to echo Councillor O'Connor's sentiments there earlier, which feels like quite a long time ago now, but agree with most of those. A number of the recommendations that did come up last minute have obviously stirred up a lot of resentment within the community, and I believe if due process was followed, they should have been included in the original community consultation. I too have received between 40, 50 emails this week. I haven't received too many from anyone who wants to see those items retained in there. So we're hearing loud and clear from our community, especially those in the farming community, that they aren't happy with the terrestrial biodiversity and the groundwater vulnerability being removed. And I'll be voting to support them and represent them based on those numbers. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Stadmiller. So my point that I was going to mention was that in regard to the LEP, and I couldn't contemplate voting against the LEP when it was presented, but what I did have a problem was voting for a document that I knew had mistakes and anomalies, as they're called, in the report in them. And the suggestion that they could be worked through the application process, and my train of thoughts would have been, get it right the first time and you wouldn't have to work through it. So I had some trouble voting for something that we were told, basically told it wasn't correct. It could be rectified and fixed, but it wasn't correct. But we were asked to vote it in on that ground. So while the LEP, and as everyone has said today, congratulations to all the staff involved, Councillor Armstrong on being the chair of those committee meetings, I think you said there was 40 of them. A lot of work's gone into it. And this is like any other document. We need to get it as close to being correct as we can. And to vote for something knowingly that is incorrect is something that I've struggled with. I too received the group emails from 45 or amount of people that sent them to me. I read them all. I probably only had to read 2 and the rest were very much the same, but I appreciate that. And I appreciate that people have got opinions on these matters. And while I may or may not agree with those opinions, I highly respect their right to have those opinions and to express them. And all I would ask a couple of the email people who wrote would they would show the same courtesy to all councillors. So having said that, and I think we've been around the room pretty consistently. I think I've been fair and open to everyone. Just Councillor Fleming, make it quick. Make it quick.
Before we vote, is it possible to include the clauses without the maps?
I'll pass to Bryce.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So point 2 of the clause defines the area which the clause applies to, which is the mapped area. If the area isn't mapped, it would apply to all of the Hilltops local government area.
Thank you.
So okay, thank you.
So on that note, the recommendation, so a mover and a seconder, and beg your pardon? Just taking it, just hang it. No. Sorry, councillors, I'm back. So on that, I'll put the resolution. A, all those in favour?
We have
write them down.
Manchester, Stadmiller, Wallace, O'Connor, Horden, and Rolls. So
Thank
Horden,
you.
O'Connor, Rolls, Manchester, Stadmiller.
Those against?
And those against, Walker,
Flannery.
Ingram, Armstrong, and Flannery.
That motion is carried, councillors. That takes us to the second rescission motion, which is 21183, item F2, and that is to amend the LEP RU1 and RU4 to include horticulture as permissible without consent. Okay, I'll throw to one of the councillors for the rescission motion. Would they like to a move or second first? Move Councillor Manchester, seconded Councillor Rolls. Thank you. Would one of you like to speak to your motion? Councillor, they've both got their hands up, so Councillor Rolls, go to you first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the Mayor. I speak for this motion, this rescission motion, on a number of grounds. The first one is the speed with which it was put from the floor, and I did raise this before at our last extraordinary meeting. For a major change like this, time has to be given for consideration and consultation, and none of that was given. As I did last time, I apologise, even though I did vote against it, for the fact that I didn't raise this issue earlier, that motions like this, I feel are inconceived, even though I take it as the democratic right for anybody to do this. Mr. Mayor, I'm also concerned that if this planning commission was removed, then that can have serious consequences for the safety and organised development of our community. I think it ties in with the first amendment, with that of biodiversity and also groundwater. Before also, comments have been made about DAs having to be now gained for structures on agricultural sites and also on smaller blocks. And I see this as logical. It gives the community a chance to understand what is happening in their region without development happening with no controls at all. I think it's also important to realise that the effects of small agricultural industries such as horticulture, if there are no checks on it, where does it end? I think the siting of it is important, as we see many places with large lot residential, for example, which will border onto R4 in particular, but also RU1. Also, as a person who has some knowledge of RU1 areas and the difficulties that are in place where there are horticultural activities right next door, it works both ways, both for the broadacre farmer if he has a small plot near him, but also for that person perhaps with a small agricultural venture right next door to them. The use of sprays that can work either way. I take the point too that if there is some control over it, then it avoids to a certain extent that discord that can come about, and it's a means of working through complaints and working out a plan so that we can all live together amicably side by side. And this is a reason that I support it. And also I go back to my last point that I raised, and that is of whether, as a result of that meeting in February 2021 and the consultation and engagement strategy, if we really have the right, if we look at our consultation objectives, do we comply with those? And my suggestion is that we don't.
I believe we've been there. We did. Thank you, Councillor. I'm sorry, Councillor Rolls, were you finished? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's fine. I was just about to finish. So for these reasons, I'm certainly voting for this rescission.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Connor, are you against?
No, sorry, I just want to ask a question.
Question for Councillor O'Connor?
Okay, just the question is, we aren't saying that RU4 lands can't have horticulture on them, which is what I think the speaker in open forum thought. It is just that a consent needs to be put in. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. That is correct, Councillor O'Connor. It just means that we do still encourage the use of the area in AU1 and AU4 for horticultural practices, if that's what the land user would like to use the land for. All we're seeking for is that it's done through a development application process.
Thank you very much, Director. And could you, for her benefit, just go through what horticulture includes, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Horticulture means the cultivation of fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, nuts, cut flowers and foliage and nursery products, but does not include plant nursery, turf farming or viticulture.
Oops. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I might just get the Director to repeat that answer for me again, please. Sorry, I was distracted.
Yes, certainly. Again, horticulture means the cultivation of fruits, vegetables, mushrooms, nuts, cut flowers and foliage and nursery products for the commercial purposes, but does not include plant nursery, turf farming or viticulture.
So if I wanted to plant a crop of oats or a crop of wheat, that's allowable without consent?
Yeah, it's a different land use. It's not horticulture, it's just farming. But yeah.
I'm just saying if there was the block of land and what's been indicated isn't allowed without consent under horticulture, I would be able to plant a crop of oats or a crop of wheat. Obviously, because it's not mentioned there.
Yeah, so through you, Mr Mayor, cropping and extensive cropping is known as extensive agriculture, extensive grazing and cropping, which is a different land use. So
that wasn't my question.
Sorry,
If I had a block of land the size we're talking about, and horticulture isn't allowed without consent, which is fair enough, and I've just had explained to me what comes under horticulture. From what I've read there, I could have a crop of oats or wheat in that same size paddock, and I wouldn't have to seek consent. Is that correct?
If that land use is existing, if it's what it's been in the past and has been used for that purpose, then it's currently their current activity on that site. So it's a continued use.
Thank you. Without consent. Okay. Thanks for that. Councillor Flannery. Councillor Flannery, speak again.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the answer to that was you would be able to plant oats without consent. Mr Mayor, the reason I moved this amendment was quite simple. We recall ourselves the Hilltops Council based on, apart from other things, we are now, our administrative centre is now what we have long referred to as the cherry capital of Australia. But if you want to grow cherries, if you want to grow plums, other stone fruit, you've got to get consent. And RU4 land, which as part of the young LEP was assigned specific note to protect small intensive agricultural pursuits. And now, as we are all aware from the submission that was made at the last council meeting when the LEP was being adopted, significant areas of RU4 are being purchased for housing blocks and for subdivision. The purpose of my amendment was to try and enable RU4 to be developed for intensive agricultural pursuits without consent to get it back on track for what it was originally intended. Too much of our small areas that are agricultural are being swallowed up and developed. And I strongly believe this will enable people to develop stone fruits and other horticultural pursuits, which this area has long lived with. For anyone to think that you can spray pesticides, herbicides around in a laissez-faire manner is ridiculous. Everyone that uses pesticides and herbicides needs to attend ChemCert training. You have obligations. You have obligations to the state environmental planning rules. It's ridiculous to assert that people can just go and plant stone fruit, plant horticultural crops and not have any regard for what their practices will impact. The more likely consequence is increasingly that land is being bought up and then people are objecting to what the very essence of this of the Southwest Slopes and Hilltops Council is, and that is agriculture. It makes up nearly 70% of our rateable income and it needs to be protected for what it is. And that is the basis upon my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flannery. I've got the Councillor O'Connor to speak for the recommendation, I'd imagine. Councillor O'Connor.
Oh, no, just a question to Councillor Flannery, if that's okay.
Okay, yes, Councillor.
So, Councillor Flannery, what difference would it make if you had to get consent? I agree entirely with you. That area is for those small orchards and things, but why not get a consent? I mean, why just go ahead and do it without the consent?
Councillor Flannery, you can answer if you like, and if you don't like, well, you don't have to answer. I'll leave it to you.
To answer to the best of my ability, my view is that we have long held this town, and the reason this town, being young and Harden and Burua as almost satellites, have survived and thrived through a number of downturns is because of the horticultural pursuits around here. And I believe whilst we want economic growth, whilst we want people living here, we need to protect that, and we need to protect the rights of people to do it without objections from their neighbour, and then what I regard as, from time to time, ill-informed people making decisions on whether those crops should or should not be built with reference to their neighbours. If people want to live by RU4 land and plant it and put houses on it instead of plant it to horticultural crops, they should do so at their own risk.
Thank you, Councillor Flannery, for that. Councillor Walker. Councillor Walker?
I've got to find the button. But I object to this. This has just raised more issues in my mind. We've defined horticulture, but we know in our own mind that agriculture, and it's been restricted, and there's by this, we're asking for an application to plant an orchard, for example. To grow flowers, we need an application to go and see the council to go and grow flowers, or whatever it may be. But to grow a cereal crop, we don't need that authority, even though they use the same line and the same type of chemical for the same purposes. But having said that, and in my mind, the rural producers or industries, and especially the stone fruit industry, which I can speak for in the Young District, are some of the most responsible custodians of the biodiversity, but also the biosecurity. My main greater concern would be for each fruit tree that's grown in backyards that don't need that authority, because of the, especially focusing on our export industry, the fruit fly situation. So it's just food for thought. I'm utterly confused with the what this phrase, this clause brings to the LEP, because we know that any other type of building that might be associated with that, we know that needs a authority anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Walker, for that. We'll go back to Councillor Rolls. Has another question or comment?
I have a question, actually, through you, Mr Mayor, and it relates to what Councillor Walker just said. I noticed that, well, one of the reasons was ancillary development, such as packing or refrigerating sheds or any sheds. If intensive plant agriculture could go ahead without consent, does that mean that actually packing sheds, maybe for orchards, could put up without consent? Because I presume, well, I know that even for Broadacre now, the building or putting up of sheds such as, machinery sheds or shearing sheds, have to have consent. Does removing this say that if you have a horticultural block, that you can actually put up what you like without any consent? Could one of the directors...
Through you, Mr Mayor. That would be correct, Councillor Rolls. That would mean that any type of development associated with that ancillary use, if it was permitted without consent, being storage units, packing sheds, nets, large-scale netting over the orchards and things like that, that would all be ancillary development and wouldn't require consent associated with that commercial enterprise. We are talking about commercial enterprises here.
Thank you for that. Where am I up to? There's hands everywhere. Hold on, councillors. We'll go around. We'll start at the bottom. Councillor O'Connor, you will go, and then.
Okay, so sorry, just based on that then, somebody could have 10 sheds on their property and a little orchard in the middle, and no one can say anything. I mean, you could end up with all sorts of things that we then spend the next 50 years trying to rectify.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor. I'll go to Councillor Wallace as I'm going up. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You must have a different image to me. I'm not knowing it, Councillor O'Connor. But anyway, I have a question through for the Director. Horticulture, and look, they may not be able to answer this because they couldn't answer about other local government areas in the last section, but I was just wondering whether horticulture without consent is a thing in other local government areas.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Actually, I can answer this, Councillor Wallace.
Oh, good.
We did investigate areas where commercial horticulture was fairly relevant, such as Griffith LEP. So the Griffith LEP does state that it is permitted without consent. However, it's an old LEP, and we've looked at their current LSPS, and in the current LSPS, they're noting that there is significant conflict with this particular clause, and they're looking at reviewing it to turn it to permitted with consent under the LEP process, or to consult with the community about turning it to permitted with consent.
Thank you for that. Councillor Manchester was next. Councillor Manchester has got the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm born and bred on a horticultural property and lived around them all my life. And they do create an issue. With Broadacre, they don't complement one another. The issue is spray drift. Contrary to what Councillor Walker said, they use the same chemical. They don't. Where the drift from an orchard spray probably wouldn't do much harm to a Broadacre farming situation, but certainly the chemicals used in Broadacre is a major concern to horticulture. and more particularly viticulture, but this doesn't include viticulture, but certainly horticulture, and you've got to contain, under the regulations, and Councillor Flannery covered this, that under the regulation you've got to try and control the chemical within the fence line. How the hell you do that, I've got no idea, and I carry all the licences, but you do. You have to look at all the wind factors and then do the spraying appropriate to the wind conditions. And if you've got orchard around you on 3 or 4 sides, and I have had that situation, it is very hard to do. And I believe if an orchard is going to crop up or pop up in a broadacre situation, that I believe they should have some sort of consent so that the neighbour can raise concerns about it, and then certain conditions we can put on that so it doesn't impact on the surrounding neighbours, the surrounding livelihood of the farmers that are trying to do the job the right way, and then all of a sudden you get an orchard, and it needn't necessarily be large, but an orchard that can crop up in the middle of a farming situation. Now, I'm certainly not against, as one of the speakers, I think it was Sophie, said, that this is not about stopping horticulture in RU4 land or in broadacre land. It's to have some sort of control on where it goes and how it goes about it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Manchester. I think I've been around everyone that had their hand up in regard to this matter. Councillor Flannery, just before I go, or Councillor Armstrong as well. Councillor Flannery first.
Just a question for the Director. Can the Director confirm that the Hilltops LSPS was only used as a reference document for our LEP, and I refer to a number of our items such as lands and rezoning around various towns that they are source documents and in fact were not included in the LEP.
Hand to Bryce.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the Hilltops Local Strategic Planning Statement is that 20-year land use planning vision document. And the Hilltops LEP is the 5 to 7 year implementation document of that broader vision. Because it's a 20-year plan, not all of the amendments or areas that are identified would go into this particular iteration of the Hilltops LEP. There are other opportunities to further investigate growth opportunities, as is the 20-year plan and the future amendments and review of the Hilltops LEP, which will occur.
So it wouldn't be correct to assume that everything that's in an LSPS vis-a-vis Griffith will therefore be in their LEP when they redo it. Is that correct?
Unfortunately, Council, we can't speak for other councils in their process, but it's an indicative document in the sense of further investigation for that particular land use from that council.
Thank you for that. I'll throw to Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on that point, I do note that the RU4 land at Young is mainly around the old soldier settlement blocks, which were actually the site of many orchards in the past, both stone fruit and of course cherries. I guess as we've noted during many of the LEP committee meetings that the number of those small orchards has reduced because of commercial viability, no doubt, and other small factors or minimal factors. But I guess what I'd like to know is how many fruit trees constitutes an intensive planting, or how many fruit trees would trigger a requirement for approval for horticulture if I was going to plant some cherry trees on my RU4 block at Monteagle or at Wirrama or somewhere.
Thank you, Councillor.
Not that I don't have an RU4 block at any of those locations. I don't need to declare an interest.
Thank you for clarifying that, Councillor. I'll throw to the Director.
It's up to the landowner at what point do they want to call themselves a commercial operator. So from the point that one plant is for the fruit from that, the harvest from that is sold on a commercial level or a commercial sale, then that is considered intensive agriculture or horticulture.
So from that, I could logically conclude that if I had a contract to supply plums to a a jam manufacturer and I put 3 trees in, that I'd need to get council approval to plant 3 plum trees?
We subject to, there are guides from DPI as well, which we assess against. So that's where we would do that internal assessment. If there was a compliance issue raised about those 3 trees being produced from a neighbour, we would look at a guideline based on what could be considered intensive farming.
Okay, so that's a different response to the first response I received. So I'd just like to follow that, if I could, Mr. Mayor, and find out how many trees that would be, because I can see that this is potentially a moving goalpost, and I have deep concerns that with moving goalposts, the community is the one that suffers.
Still have a staff member like the answer, we'll take it on notice.
How many trees that would be?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So each development application for a commercial horticultural enterprise is done by a case-by-case basis. If they consider themselves to be a commercial enterprise, that they're selling their goods at a commercial standard or at a commercial rate, that's what will be considered. It's hard to comment on the number of trees given the scale of different intensive agriculture. As you mentioned, that the viability of intensive horticulture means that probably more trees are more commercially viable than less trees. So, but each DA and each economic enterprise is assessed on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you for that. Just on that, Mr. Mayor, if I can just confirm that is a zone objective for RU4.
To the Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the objectives of the RU4 land are to enable sustainable primary industry and other compatible land uses, to encourage and promote diversity and employment opportunities in relation to primary industry enterprises, particularly those that require smaller lots or that are more intensive in nature, to minimise conflict between land uses within this zone and land uses within adjoining zones, to maintain areas of high conservation value, vegetation, to encourage development that is in accordance with sound management and land capability practices, and that takes into account the natural resources of the locality, to protect and enhance the water quality of receiving watercourses and groundwater systems, and to reduce land degradation, and to encourage the development of non-agricultural land uses that are compatible with the character of the zone and sustain high quality rural amenity.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Stadmiller is next in line. Councillor Stadmiller.
Mr. Mayor, just through the relevant director, could I ask what the development application fee would be for an orchard on RU4 land?
Thank you, Councillor. To the Director.
Again, it's a case-by-case cost because it comes down to the cost of development.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stadmiller is nodding your head, so he's fine there. I'll go to Councillor Walker's got his hand again. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Now I'm going to put it somewhere.
Yes. Again, this discussion this evening has brought in more confusion, because what is spelling out for me is real biosecurity issues. I know Councillor Manchester disagrees with me about the similar sprays, but I know both use fungicides, and even though they might be of different quantity, but they serve the same purpose. But my main issue is around fruit fly.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I'm going, Councillor Flannery, and then I'm going to put this very shortly.
Question, Mr. Mayor. The permissions that attach to having a consent with, a use without consent, such as the ability to build sheds, could the director answer that can easily be amended in the schedules so that if it was permissible without consent, associated infrastructure would require consent. Is that correct?
Who'd like to take that answer or take it on notice? Or Councillor Flannery, could you please repeat the question for staff? Thank you.
The point raised by Councillor O'Connor, and I think was a gross exaggeration to say 10 sheds could be built under the guise of an orchard, and they could all be built without consent, could easily be remedied by removing the ability of any permissible use to build infrastructure without consent, if council were of a mind to do so. Is that correct?
Who'd like to take that?
Farm buildings are permitted with consent. However, when they're ancillary to the use, they would be permissible without consent.
Thank you for that. Okay, councillors, unless someone's got something...
That didn't answer the question. That didn't answer. I don't believe it answered the question. Could council amend it to have them permissible only with consent?
Would the director like to answer that or take that on notice? I'd say they'd take that on notice, councillor, having a conversation to come up with a reply either way for you, so it's only fair and staff that they take that on notice. So thank you for that, staff. Look, unless something's going to fall out of the sky in regard to this matter, it's been discussed pretty well. So I'd now like to put the recommendation on the second rescission motion. All those in favour?
All right, we have Manchester, Rolls, Stadmiller, Wallace, O'Connor and Horden.
Those against?
We have Flannery, Ingram and Armstrong.
And Walker.
And Walker.
The second rescission motion is successful. Thank you very much, councillors, for that item. The next item is an amendment to the resolution 21183, item F3 as follows, and it's documented there in front of you. Now, I'm just not too sure where we're going to go with this. Given it's a rescission motion put by Councillor Rolls, O'Connor and Manchester on behalf of a company who earlier tonight spoke against this rescission motion. So we'll just have to see where that pans out. But would one of the councillors who put this amendment up like to speak to it in light of what I've just said?
Yeah, I'll be the devil's advocate, Mr. Mayor. But yeah, look.
Before I do, Councillor Manchester, we better get a mover and a seconder for it. Move, Councillor Rolls, seconded Councillor O'Connor. Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Manchester.
Yeah, look, I'll speak for it. I've been an advocate of it from day one. I can see a problem with COSMAG with their development on the current block up there. When Councillor Flannery moved the amendment at our last special meeting to just include the industrial land, I started to think that some of the infrastructure is across some boundaries, and I didn't realise until I had a look at the maps to the extent that the infrastructure on the sheds and other infrastructure on the block went across 2 or 3 different zonings or boundaries, not zonings but boundaries, and also impacted on the zoning, proposed zoning there. And I thought, well, it'd be only fair to come to a compromise and make sure that all the infrastructure is on the one zone. Hence, and after some discussion, I thought the most logical one would be IN2, which one would retain the value of the land, which is one of the concerns of the applicant. And secondly, it would get they will still be able to carry on their enterprise there as an existing use, and that all the infrastructure that they possess on the block comes under the one zone, and that was the whole idea of it. And I did have some discussions with COSMAG along those lines, and I was hoping, and I did say to them that this is a compromise that may get across the line here with council, and there was no promises, so I decided that I would stick to, after thinking about it and the further conversation this morning with them, I stuck with what I believe is the best compromise for COSMAG under the conditions. And having these 3 items there, or three parts of the motion. One is to have the IN2 zoning across the 4 lots, and the RE2, which I could be left open to it, but I believe that the RE2, or there'd be no reason why I wouldn't object to it being IN2 either. But further investigations on the zoning could be carried out through the LSPS process at the next review, which should be in the next 5 years, and the council work with the landowner, the federal and state government, to come to some sort of compromise to secure funds so that they can move from where they are and out to a more appropriate site. This is something that should have been done by the previous young council, and it was never touched on and never done. And I believe that unless we carry out something like this and we take it on board and engage with COSMAG and engage with state and federal government, and I think the federal and state government would look at this favourably, because it's a 70-year-old business, or a 69, but now who's worried about a year? When you get to my age, you don't worry about it. But it's a 70-year-old business that was established in Young. The town has grown around it. There are issues with it, with the surrounding neighbours, and the only way we're going to solve the problem is to find a site elsewhere and help them move. Otherwise, they'll be there. They could be there for the next 70 years, and Young's only going to expand even more around it. And I believe this way we can move forward both with COSMAG and with the state and federal governments to come up with a solution that would benefit the Young township and especially the neighbourhood around COSMAG. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Manchester. I've got several comments I could reply to, and I will reply to some of the statements you made that were actually incorrect, but I'll leave that to some other councillors I think will jump in before me. Councillor Walker to speak against. Councillor Walker.
No, not at all. No, not if you're speaking against, not at all. I will against. I endorse what Councillor Manchester says, except I think it should be left as Industrial 1, IND1, because conditions are already applied, but extended to those 4 portions that the representative from the company suggested.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Armstrong's his hand there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of issues. First of all, my concern is, significant concern, is that this is a decision that's not being made based upon planning principles. It's being made based upon financial principles. And the one that comes back to us on a regular basis is that of land values. Well, for the benefit of councillors, I'd just like to advise that the Valuer General has a tool on its website that allows you to check land values for the last 20 years. I've taken the time to do that, and I've also taken the time to compare those land values at 2 Park Avenue with some land that's actually zoned RE2 in a very similar situation, backing onto some large tract of RE1 or open space area that's for public recreation. Now, what's quite interesting is that in 2001, the valuation for 2 Park Avenue, which includes all of the lots that Mr. Councillor Manchester just spoken about, was $47,000. The valuation in 2011, which is 12 months after the last LEP was made, so we haven't been confused by any of the deferred matters, was $176,000. In the same period, the RE2 property started off at $45,900 in 2001, and in 2011 was valued at $152,000. So there's $129,000 capital growth in the case of the valuation of COSMAG, sort of land in Park Avenue, and 106,100 for the RE2 block. The interesting part about that is that the RE2 block only has an area of 12,890 square metres, as opposed to the 20,610 that the Value General values at Park Avenue. Essentially what it means is that the capital appreciation for the industrial land, as is proposed, was $6.26 a square metre over those 10 years. And for the RE2 land, the public recreation or the private recreational land, was in actual fact $8.23 a square metre. So it would appear as though being zoned, being classified as RE2 doesn't impact your valuation in a negative manner at all. So I think that that really isn't an issue that should be considered here, because the valuer generals determine these valuations rather than speculation around a council table. The other thing, of course, is that some of the documentation provided to council shows a very large deviation or billabong area in the creek in the lot 2470. I note from the aerial photographs provided by the objectors that that's billabong's disappeared. So I guess I'm going to have to ask the general manager, has that billabong disappeared with approval? And if it has it disappeared with landfill of a known quality, or is potentially the billabong been taken away with fill of an unknown quality and potentially rendering the land as contaminated or unsanitary land in terms of its potential to build upon? These are issues that concern me greatly if council is going to revise its zonings, because quite simply in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, if Cosmag was to leave the site, the zoning would continue and someone else may potentially build something on land which may be unsanitary or unsuitable for use for that purpose. So I guess I've got to ask the general manager about the history of the billabong and whether there's been approval for that to fill it in, and also whether the property, as whether the fill used for it is of known quality.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just had opportunity, because it's been an ongoing discussion. I did pull the premises file on it to get an understanding on what has occurred over time, particularly because of I was actually looking for zoning issues. There is no documentation on the files that we had that answers the question about how and what it was filled in with, but it was filled in over the time where the buildings and the operations expanded. I will note that it is not the current, we're not talking about the current owners. This is the history of the operation, the business which is endures, but not the current owners. And so there is no documentation on that file on how it was filled in, but yes, the billabong was filled in at a point in time. It was any time between in the 1980s through to the 1990s, buildings were put up. They were approved, of course. There were pipes laid underneath from what I could see from the schematics. I'm not a planner, but it appeared that there was some piping underneath to deal with water. But yes, the water course was changed and it was filled in, and there is nothing on file to indicate how it was filled in. Does that answer all of your questions, Councillor Armstrong, or is there another question?
I guess that goes to the question is, are we aware of whether the land is sanitary land in terms of its ability to be built upon and used for light industrial purposes?
The question to the director is, given the answer that I've just provided is I do not know what is within the land, given the the amendment motion is to zone this land for an industrial purpose, what surety do we have that we are zoning the land appropriately, given we do not know what lies beneath the current structures? Is that correct, Councillor Armstrong?
Yes, my concern is that an action in doing so may render council liable in the same way that other local governments have been, where they've permitted development to occur on unsanitary land, or potentially unsanitary land, or unsuitable land, I should say, rather. Thank you.
I will throw to the Director through you, Mr Mayor.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the previous resolution from the Young LEP was for the landowner to go away and undertake some reporting and audits of that land for any future zoning request. That was the past resolution of that council. Generally, for the zoning of industrial alone, it could potentially be a false zoning, is what I would deem it, as that without the investigations and justification for that zoning, it is unknown, and it is a due diligence any future development application received by an applicant would need to undertake.
So I can gather that that examination and report was never forthcoming.
That is correct, Councillor.
Thank you.
So Councillor Stedmiller's got his hand up. Councillor Stedmiller?
Just a quick question, Mr Mayor. Based on Councillor Armstrong's line of questioning regarding what's in the soil, under the soil and rezoning, what, if any, testing have we done on any other land that's been rezoned in this current LEP to determine what's in the soil there?
Hand to Bryce.
Through you, Mr Mayor, as a part of the gateway determination from the State Government Department of Planning, there is a requirement for any land that's proposed to be rezoned for residential purposes to undertake a preliminary site investigation for contamination. That assessment was included in the post-exhibition planning proposal, and undertaking that assessment at a desktop level as directed by the state government.
Thank you for that, Royce. And Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a few questions and concerns. The concern is that if this rescission motion were successful, we'd be, in 5 years, we'll be back in the same spot. My questions are, is the business's current activities permissible in a light industrial zone, firstly? And the second one relates to the objector's approach to council in relation to zoning this land residential if they were to sell the land. The objector advised that that was not countenanced by council staff. I'm not quite sure why, but I wonder if we get some comment on that as well. Thank you.
For the first question there, Councillor, the current user has existing use rights under the zoning of Industrial 2. If an application of that had been received, if it wasn't there with existing use rights, it would not be permissible. For the second part of the question, I'll hand over to Bryce.
Through you, Mr Mayor, do you mind just clarifying for me, Councillor Wallace, so I can accurately respond?
Yeah. Look, the objectors advised me that they approached council staff and had one meeting with them and suggested that the land could be zoned whatever it is at the moment to be decided. But if they were ever to sell the land because they were able to move, as envisaged in number 3 of the rescission motion, that they would sign a deed to agree that the land be rezoned residential. I was just wondering what, apparently he said council staff didn't countenance that idea at all, and I'm wondering why and if that's the case.
I'll pass to the staff. Do you want to answer it or do you want me to address it? Okay.
We'll do a share response here, Councillor Wallace. In part of Councillor meeting with the landowner, I can accurately state that the General Manager and myself met on several occasions with the applicant. There was also submissions received as part of the community consultation period as well, and meetings with the planning team at that time. In relation to the residential, there was that requirement back in the young LEP for them to provide information for it to be zoned residential at that time for it to be considered, and that was related to ensure that the land wasn't contaminated and that it addressed other risks associated with that land for residential purposes. Council will continue to request that studies and confirmation of what type of contamination exists on that land before we would even consider an R1. However, we are subject to your resolutions, Council.
Thank you. That Councillor Manchester. Councillor Manchester?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just a couple of points that have been brought up. The billabong that Councillor Armstrong brought up about, like that's, that may have even been Shire when they built the road above Cosmag years and years ago. It may have altered the whole flow line, so the billabong became non-existent. But I can't ever remember the billabong being there in my time, and certainly through the 70s I did use the weighbridge at Cosmag for weighing grain that was going to a chook farm just up the road, and I can assure you back in the 70s that the billabong wasn't there then, so I'm not sure just when it did exist, but certainly the map, the early...
Councillor, I can probably help you there. I think Councillor Armstrong can probably help more, but I can assure you if you look at the maps that were provided to us by the company, the billabong most definitely was there, and I believe it was filled in about 1987. I could be corrected there.
Anyhow, I know. But the other point I was going to make was that I believe that the council funded a study and a soil test of the site back in the way I understand it, back in 2011, around about 2010, 11, around that time. And I thought the results were cleared, but except for a small area near the railway line. But I could stand to be corrected there.
Thank you, Councillor Manchester. Well, I might have a little go now. I've been back on this matter. I think councillors are mostly aware of my thoughts in relation to rezoning any more industrial land in what is a residential area of the young township. Actually, how anyone can contemplate that is a different line on life than what I've got for the residents who live in that area of our community. The point about council helping and partnering with the company looking into relocation has been spoken at several different times. Correct, you'll need state and federal funding. As we know, councillors, the council has no money, and I can assure you at any time when it was brought up before, the company had no money. So there is a problem there. We all agree it would be better located in other locations, but a couple of times when sites were mentioned, it was just unfortunate that the resources they need to run their operation weren't available at those sites. So that made any relocation plans very difficult. The idea of prior consent is there so the operation continues exactly as it is. There's never been any doubt or anyone ever wanted to see anyone lose any opportunities for work or jobs. It is the last thing that any councillor would want to see. But we also have to take into account the environmental and the mental well-being of the people who live in that area of our town. There's been a number of environmental issues over the years, and there's also been issues with people's mental well-being that live in that area of town. The mood of tonight's meeting with these rescission motions has clearly been the majority of councillors agreeing with staff and proposals that staff put forward for our LEP, and that's came through very clear to me. So just a few facts. The first one being that the actual operator of the company spoke against this rescission motion, would nearly tell me that this rescission motion needs to be dealt with in the negative. That being the case, I would like to foreshadow a motion. And that motion is to continue the theme of tonight and totally support staff in their suggestions for the planning in our local LEP. And that foreshadowed motion would be that the lots as per attachment, when we haven't got the attachment, lot 1, lot 2, lot 705, lot 2470, lot 249, I'm sorry Deirdre, you probably, I'll have to get I want to get these down because I want everyone to be well aware when we're voting on what we're voting for. So staff are giving Deirdre the details there. But my point is, when them lots and DP numbers are put up, that they are zoned as staff suggested in the original LEP for Hilltops. And the second point would be, they would be zoned RE2, public recreation, in the Hilltops LEP. The second dot point would be that the landowner submit appropriate documentation for site-specific planning proposals within 12 months. I'll let Deirdre work on that foreshadowed motion. And I'll come back. Councillor Flannery. Councillor Flannery.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to just speak in opposition to the motion. I believe the amendment I made gave the current owners some solace. We were advised by staff that they had existing use rights. They have a small amount of land that is currently zoned industrial. I held the view that leaving that as industrial and zoning the balance as RE2, basically as suggested by staff, was providing a very clear message to the business that time was not up, but it was time to start seriously considering new plans, and that council, in making
We've lost you, Councillor Flannery. Technology, Councillor Flannery, we've lost you. And Councillor Flannery will realise he's lost, surely. I'm just sending him a message. Councillor Flannery, I'll go while we're waiting for that, Councillor Flannery to get back on. Councillor Walker's got his hand. Councillor Walker.
Yes, if I may. After reading the letter from the representative of coordinate we received today, and his presentation tonight, I think he's been misrepresented. The way I understood it, and the way I read it, it outlines it clearly in the letter we received amongst the many emails we received, that the proposal was for lots 1, 2, 705, 2470, that is currently, it is recommended that that go to industrial 2 by the proposal put before us, and that 2494 go to RE2. By contrast, the representative tonight said, and in the letter indeed that we received today, the email, it's virtually the same proposal, except instead of being changed to industrial 2 where you can't see the condition, can't find the conditions to, I don't know whether council can answer the difference between the conditions or what they do on in industrial 1 and industrial 2, and that's his main point of concern. Why I wish to leave it at just add that extra block which cuts through where the boundary cuts through the middle of one of the buildings, like you mentioned tonight. Just add that block onto the existing ones that are already in industrial 1.
Thank you, Councillor Walker, for that. Councillor Flannery's back on board. Councillor Flannery, we'll go back to you.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I'm not too sure where I dropped out, but look, I thought the amendment that I moved at the last meeting, which was voted for, recognised the intent of the LEP committee and staff that the land was no longer suitable for industrial use, be it light industrial, general industrial, heavy industrial. We were sending a message that time wasn't up, but the days were getting closer, and that there was an obligation on council to work with this company to find new land to relocate themselves and get their business established just as strongly as it's ever been. And by zoning a small portion of the land industrial, I thought it gave them some solace that we recognise the importance of our business, but rezoning the rest of the land RE2 was saying that it's no longer the intention or the desire of council to have them there, have businesses to continue to operate there long term as industrial.
Thank you, Councillor Flannery, for that. Councillor Rolls.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I must admit I'm at a bit of a quandary. I voted against Councillor Flannery's motion before and was convinced reluctantly, I suppose, in this motion before us tonight, mainly because of those last two sections where it said it would be revised or reviewed in the next 5 years, and also that we would look for other sites. I must admit that I find it very difficult to support COURSMAG if they don't want to support this. And in that, Mr Mayor, I take on board what you say about taking note of our expert advice, which I think is of the highest quality and that we should keep in mind. But at the same time, I'm also aware that we're a community and it's also an interconnection, if you like, or of networks, and that includes business and people and towns and infrastructure and that sort of thing. So I'm of concern. We still have to show our support for industry in the area, and that goes in our LEP plans as well. But I have to admit that if the COURSMAG team don't like the motion that we've suggested tonight, then I find it very difficult to go anywhere else but to support the experts in their decision making. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rolls, for that. Okay, it seems that we have been around and around. We go around. Councillor Walker's got another comment before I put this. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I'm confused about this. We couldn't clarify the difference in conditions. We've got very tight conditions on that business, a very important business in town, between Industrial 1 and Industrial 2. And we've been told before that the change of conditions would impact severely, to change the zoning would impact severely on the viability of the business staying there and open at the moment.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Staff would be only happy to take the confusion out of those industrial zonings. Thank you.
I can answer the first part of the question and I'll defer to Bryce for the second part. The first part is that the difference between the IN1 and IN2 is IN2 light industry prohibits heavy industry uses, which include hazardous industries and offensive industries, which and also taking into consideration why we picked the lighting industry was because that previously the industrial land that was zoned there under the former 1991 Young LEP had a 4A industrial zoning, which is comparable to light industries.
Right.
Through you, Mr Mayor, as is discussed previously, the site has existing use rights on those 4 lots. If the zoning was to change, that existing use rights does not change, they can continue to operate as they currently do.
Thank you very much for that, Bryce. And as was indicated earlier on, there's never been any intention by anyone to restrict their ability to trade or operate their business. And their talk about the evaluations with the rezoning of the land, I think Councillor Armstrong probably covered that off pretty well and showed some examples that that doesn't actually quite ring true. So on that point, I will put the point C, the amended resolution for 21-183 item F3 as noted. All those in favour?
Councillor Manchester.
Could that clarify, please, what that motion is?
Yes, I can clarify it for you, Councillor Walker. Amend resolution 21/183 item F3 as follows. Lot as per attachment 1 be zoned in the Hilltops local environmental plan to the following. Lot 1 DP 135448 IN2 light industrial. Lot 2 DP 135448 IN2 light industrial. Lot 705 DP 754611 IN2 light industrial. Lot 2470 DP 754611 IN2 light industrial. Lot 249 DP 754611 RE2 private recreation. 2, further investigate the zoning of the land during the 5-year review of Hilltops local strategic planning statement or during related strategic planning studies such as the economic land study, and work with the landholder, federal and state agencies to identify suitable industrial land that could cater for further relocation of the enterprise.
And through you, Mr Mayor, just for clarification, this is not the foreshadowed motion prepared by the Mayor, which we have should this motion, this amendment motion, fail. We have the foreshadowed motion, which you then will consider should this motion fail.
Thank you, Mr General Manager, for clarifying that in case anyone was confused with that. So on that note, I will put the amended resolution as just stated to Council. All those in favour?
Councillor
Manchester,
Stadmiller. Councillor Stadmiller. Those against?
Those against?
Councillor Wallace. The rest. Councillor Walker. All other councillors.
Okay, thank you, councillors. So then I'll now read, but the foreshadowed motion will go up. Could I have a seconder for the foreshadowed motion, please, as I stated earlier? Councillor Armstrong, thank you. So it's been seconded. We're going to put the motion up, councillors, so we all understand exactly what...
Question, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Flannery.
If the foreshadowed motion doesn't get voted, if it's voted down, then we stay with the existing zoning. Is that correct?
That's correct, councillor.
As amended at the last meeting.
That is correct, Councillor Flannery. It would be the amendment that was debated on the 25th of August and resolved.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Stadmiller. Sorry, Mr. Councillor Stadmiller. We haven't got you, councillor. Can't hear you.
Mr Mayor, could you just read the foreshadowed, please?
It's going to be put up on the screen. Here it comes. Here it comes. Here it comes. Councillors, can we all see what's on the screen? We're just clarifying the wording up correctly, councillors.
Mr Mayor, what's meant by Part B? Could Part B be clarified, please?
I most certainly can be.
Through you, Mr Mayor, it allows an opportunity under the EP&A Act for the applicant to go away and undertake some additional documentations, planning investigations that can be considered by council to rezone that land in the future from RE2 to industrial, subject to this further investigation work that we've been seeking.
Thank you for that, Director, and I might just add that opportunity has been offered previously. So, councillors, can all councillors, if you can't see what's on the board, please let me know. So everyone's concede the foreshadowed motion that there's been moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions before Councillor Walker?
Yeah.
Councillor Walker.
Do you have a question?
Councillor Walker, you're muted, my friend. Councillor.
Can I have it clarified? Can you hear me?
Yes, Councillor?
Yeah.
No, we lost you again. Take your mute, Councillor. No. No, can't hear you, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Walker, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can I have it clarified? I've got this one in front of me. Can I have it clarified what the alternative is if this one's...
Councillor Walker, should this foreshadowed motion, which is, well, it's now become the motion because the motion we first started with tonight was lost, so this foreshadowed motion now is the motion. Should this motion fail, it will revert to what was debated on the 25th of August at the council meeting, and that would be, I do have the minutes here from that meeting. Sorry.
Mr. Mayor.
It's actually, sorry, it is actually in your paper. It is in the paper where it would say, amend LEP in relation to COURSMAG, that industrial area to remain industrial and that the balance be zoned to RE2 and that the land current RE1 to RE2. So just to remind councillors, the decision on the night was the portion of land that had been zoned industrial back in the 1991 young LEP as industrial would remain industrial, and that land that was unzoned or zoned RE1 would become RE2. The motion that is before you tonight is the recommendation from staff. So you have what you debated on the 25th of August, and then you now have a motion to replace that with this one.
Thank you for that, Mr. General Manager. Do I have anyone with any other questions? Councillor Rolls got a hand up. Yep. Can't hear you, Councillor Rolls.
I know, because I was muted.
Oh, there you
Sorry,
are.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry, just Councillor Rolls, can I just interject? Are councillors happy for us to take down the reading of the motion now so that we can see all the councillors, because we can't actually see all the councillors? Is that okay? Yep, thank you. Deirdre, can you stop?
Yeah, there we go.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry, Councillor Rolls.
Yeah, so I just need a bit of clarification. The original motion, which was, I presume, Councillor Flannery's motion, still stands if the revised motion is lost?
That's correct. So in your business paper on page 4, point F3, the motion that would stand, which was the amendment raised by Councillor Flannery on the night, amend the LEP in relation to COURSMAG that industrial area to remain industrial and the balance be zoned to RE2 and that land current RE1 to RE2. So that amendment kept the portion of industrial land that was industrial land zoned back in young LEP 1991, and the rest of the land which either was unzoned RE1 or RE2 all become RE2. The foreshadowed motion is, as discussed, is the original recommendation from staff that it be all zoned, rezoned or zoned RE2 in the proposed LEP, notwithstanding there is all the existing business use rights. Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Well, I think so. I just want to make sure that I'm voting on the right thing. So I'm voting On the foreshadowed motion.
You're voting on the foreshadowed
on the
motion.
original motion.
Yeah, no, you're voting. If we vote to rescind the original motion and replace it with this foreshadowed motion is to effectively rescind the amendment that was passed on the 25th of August and replace it with the effective zoning of RE2 for all of the land, consistent with staff advice, but that does not affect their existing business use rights.
Yep, no, that's clear. I just want to make clear. Thank you.
Councillor Stadmiller.
Just a question on the fact that we've got RE2 public recreation on the current recommendation. I'm looking at the land use table here and I'm struggling to find it in the Hilltops Council attachment C land use zones, proposed objective uses and mapping. If we can just get some clarification around that.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Stadmiller. That is correct. It is actually private recreation. I couldn't read the director's handwriting. Sorry.
Follow-up question, Mr.
Councillor Stadmiller. Yep, Councillor Stadmiller.
Are we therefore attempting to zone something that is obviously industrial in its capabilities and its operations into private recreation, which is, I don't know, billy carts and riding bikes around in the dirt? I'm not sure what's going on here now. I'm completely confused.
I can pass to the Director of Planning and staff who did the original zoning in the original LEP and take their advice on board as we did with earlier matters. So I'll pass to the Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor. It's Council staff's assessment of the site under a planning assessment that it would be preferred to have that land zoned RE2. It was unzoned. The industrial land to rezoned to RE2, private recreation, and that the other land that was originally zoned, what was then back then 6A, which is public recreation, to rezone that into private recreation as it is in private ownership. The option for the Part B of the resolution foreshadowed is for the applicant to come back to council with the planning documentation to support the suitability of that site as industrial.
Thank you for that, Director. We've got Councillor Walker's got another question. Councillor Walker, or comment?
Yes, I think how all this started was it appears that we're going to compromise the business unit at Causeway by changing it from industrial to recreational, if I recall the processes, how this discussion took place.
Thank you, Councillor. On that note, I'm going to put the foreshadowed motion. All those in favour?
Mark Rolls, Rita O'Connor, Greg Armstrong, John Horton, Matt Stadmiller.
Thank you. Those against?
Those against, Tony Wallace, John Walker, Tony Flannery, Chris Manchester.
The foreshadowed motion is passed. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. And all those matters have been resolved for tonight. And I thank everyone for their contribution to the debate. And we all have different opinions on different matters, but we respect each other's opinions, as the same as our email writers. Eventually, hopefully 9 times out of 10, we get to the right decision. So I thank you for your participation and also to staff. And on that note, stay safe. I have had no further updates on any COVID testing. I just thought I'd mention that. I got asked the question earlier, so the latest information I had was last night and early this morning. So thank you all.